This is Greg.
¿La vas a sacar?
My name is Greg Long. I'm from San Clemente, California. I'm 31 years old and I'm a professional big wave surfer. I've always just had this, intuition. I was meant to be a big wave surfer. That my whole background, where I was brought up, my dad was a lifeguard, grew up on the beach. Just the course was almost laid out for me, and I could just see it as a kid. And then it was just that mental, challenge that I want to, see, this idea of fear, like how I can really, grow from it and not just, run the other direction, but embrace it. And then once you kind of figure out the rhythm of it, and then the physical challenge that goes along with it, it just becomes this, what's next? What's the next step in life? And I never want to stop learning and growing, and that's what I always felt my life's direction was. So it was just all time and energy down that path, and pushed it. 2 years ago, I drowned. Suffered, it's I guess clinically considered a non-fatal drowning, where I was held down one of my wipeouts so long that I lost consciousness. And I was underwater for a significant amount of time before my rescue team was able to get to me. And had it not been for them, I was dead. So that going through the whole, the physical process of, what it's like to actually drown, and then, even worse was the mental challenge of getting back into the ocean afterwards. Just literally had my life, this perfect picture of who I was and what I was doing, and the direction just torn to shreds, and sat there for 2 years literally picking the pieces up, what's actually has makes sense to me. It was out of pure ego that I went back as soon as I did. I paddled back out to a big wave session, big wave competition 3 weeks after it happened. And it was literally, just my ego of, this is, who I am, and I got to bounce back and, prove to the world that I'm, not, haven't changed. And it was actually the worst thing that I ever could have done. And my family sat there and they watched me, and they knew how intense and passionate I was my entire life. It was everything that I slept, dreamt, breathed was, big wave surfing. So they weren't going to tell me no. I know that I did have a couple friends, and people were just observing me from a distance, like, all right, we'll see how he actually does, and maybe he is okay. And and then to the world, the hardest part actually came was after doing it and somewhat successfully, to the world, I was okay, I was back, and but internally, I was more confused than ever, because I was basically living a lie. I was terrified, to death every time I set foot in the water, and here I was pretending, that I'm okay, and telling people I'm okay, because I was, fearful of, are you going to lose sponsorship, or judgment of others? What are they going to think of you? And that was, biggest struggle of my life. When you're sitting here and you're not, you're living, a non-truth and pretending you're something you're not. That's where you just, suffer, and just this resistance to the change that, shit went down, and you're playing by a different set of rules than when you were before. So get used to it, and find your way, and your way to cope with it. And it's been a serious, evolution. Biggest. Greatest blessing in my life, looking back in the disguise at the time. I was, just so bummed that it happened, and but now I look back that, greatest experience, the whole process of it.